Hello and welcome to Theology Matters. This is Dr. John Clark. And again, we have the privilege of having Pastor Carl Greene with us today. And Pastor Greene is the pastor emeritus at Grace Community Fellowship in Noonan, Georgia. And I have the privilege of working with Carl on a day-to-day basis here. And so, Carl, again, thank you for your time and taking the time to answer all of these questions for us.
Oh, you're welcome. Good to be back with you again, John.
Excellent. And so, Carl, let's just continue. Kind of, we left off last time just talking about the ideal track for a low 20, mid 20-year-old man who's got a desire to serve in pastoral ministry. I'd like to get your opinion here on what churches, pastors, elders in our day could do better in just preparing young men for ministry, specifically young men with the gift of pastor teacher. What can we do better, Carl, in your opinion?
Um, I would say there are a few things. First is prayer. And I think for the young man, or in cases where young women are interested in some form of ministry, not pastoral, obviously, but just emphasizing uh, prayer first for the church and for the pastor and elders, praying for the Lord to bring specific people. When we believe in the sovereignty of God, that He guides, that He prepares both the person and the people that they'll be working with, and so prayer that the Lord would bring them, and then emphasizing to them the things that we looked at in the previous question about their own personal preparation and helping build within them the concept of integrity, the inside, outside, the whole person. And then offer opportunities, open the doors for them and give them suggestions and then help guide them and offer to mentor, to encourage, obviously encourage along the way. It can get very discouraging, and ministry, a lot of it's just routine. It's day to day, and it's not all exciting. In fact, sometimes it can be very painful and sometimes routine and dull, but to help guide them and encourage them in that, and especially preparing them for they're working with people, and you work with people, you have that's a challenge in any area, but I believe in ministry it's more so because we come in with such high expectations, both of the Lord and the people, because they call themselves Christians and believers, and then we find them some believers are just terribly hard to get along with, and so they'll need encouragement to be there to help them with that, and then support them personally, both in prayer, for them, with them, the counsel that they'll need along the way, giving the time for that, and then funding. If they have an opportunity to go on a short-term mission trip, or if they want to take a course online, if they eventually go to Bible college seminary, to offer the help that's needed. May not be able to do everything, but at least uh, put our money where our mouth is and support. And those would be a few things briefly. You can expand on that if you want, but
No, definitely. I mean, those are great. I think what I'm hearing through all of this is just be intentional and make them a priority. Just
right.
view them as an investment, worthwhile of our time. And so no, I love it. That's very, very good. Um, in terms of, and you've been to seminary, I've been to seminary. Seminary obviously has a good role in the training of young people for ministry. Um, one of the weaknesses I think in seminary, and it's not. I just don't think seminaries can do this. I just don't think they're equipped to do this. It's more of an academic
Hmm.
training, if you will. But the things that you're mentioning really are the benefit, I think, of being involved in a local church and being under the authority of local leaders. And so, yeah, I just love for you to comment on that because a lot of what you're saying here, it's not that seminary professors don't pray for their students. I'm sure that they do. It's not that they don't invest in their students. I'm sure that they do. But maybe just comment on the uniqueness of what a local church can bring, at least in this aspect of training and investment in these young people.
Yeah. Two things there. One of the discouraging things about both Bible college and seminary, in fact, Christian schools for whether it be elementary or high school, it's a strange and an odd thing, but they can have a deadening effect, perhaps because there's such heavy emphasis on academics and the mind rather than um, we know the mind and the heart are often interchangeable in Scripture, but we understand what we're saying when we say emphasizing mind over heart. Um, and I don't believe that's intentional, but it can have the side effect of deadening. Whereas I think if you're in the reality of ministry, somehow there needs to be in the training being actively involved in what you're studying to do. So that those two fit together. So you know the reality of it rather than having a an academic or mental concept of it without having the practical experience of actually doing it. Those two going together, I think, can make the person much more prepared. And I do think a church has the opportunity to do that. I think unless you have a large staff, it can be difficult to do that because it takes a lot of time. You pray for the Lord to raise up the people, and you look for those people, and they come to you, and you realize, say, as a pastor, as an elder, this is going to take a lot of work to help prepare this person. If you're really thinking of having them do it at home rather than away.
Yeah.
So there are pluses and minuses to both. I think the major plus is that a person can be involved in a local church, and I believe the local church is God's personal plan. I think He highly values the local church and intends it to be the center of His ministry and His work. And therefore, if a person can really get a grasp on what it means to serve in that setting while they're doing in-depth study, it'll help mitigate against a deadening of the spirit and becoming academic, and give them a realistic measure of their own gifts and abilities and the reality of what they're stepping into.
Yeah, very good. Well said. Well said. Moving forward, moving on here, I wanted to talk a little bit more detail about your sermon prep. Over the years, I'm sure that that's developed and modified and changed, but I'm just curious, your typical sermon prep, what does it look like now? For many years, for over 30 years, you were teaching largely on a weekly basis, sometimes bi-weekly or tri-weekly, depending on how many services the church was running. But and then now you get maybe four or five opportunities to preach a year, and then other opportunities that might come along. But talk to us a little bit about your sermon prep and kind of what steps you go through. Would you just be curious to hear your process?
Okay. Yeah, it has developed over the years. I never have been the Saturday night prep type. I've always felt so incredibly responsible that early on I was doing it at least a week early, and then over the years developed tried to do it several weeks early, sometimes having an outline of where I'm going, months earlier. So, so I always begin by praying and reading the passage that I'm going to be teaching or speaking on. I read it over and over and over, try to read it in various translations, and do that weeks ahead of time. And then praying for the audience. If it's a Sunday morning sermon, say at Grace at the church or somewhere else, praying for the audience for wisdom for myself, clarity in two ways, clarity on my part as I teach and preach, and then clear understanding on their part uh, in terms of what they hear and understand. And then as I pray through these areas and do the reading. I'm making notes, writing down questions that I have, writing down words that I want defined, writing down observations about the context, and uh, and then from that I go to study the words and the grammar, uh, and and then do more reading and reading the passage, making observations, writing down more questions. And at that point, then I began to consult outside sources, whether it be commentaries or other sources. And then I like to try to consider differing views, especially if it's a passage that has a lot of questions, differing views within uh, the area, sometimes opposing views. Write down applications. At that point, I'm beginning to form an outline, and uh, and after I form the outline, I go back and review and read again, seek to put down a title. And then at that point, I type what I call a fat outline. I don't do a manuscript. I do a fat outline, have the main points with the points that I want to make under that. Go back and edit and review it over the weeks ensuing between the time I speak and the time that I'm studying, and praying through the whole process the whole time.
Excellent. And I always appreciate when you teach. I mean, not even just the way that you handle the Word of God, but also the effort that you clearly put into trying to find relevant stories and illustrations and sometimes personal, but sometimes historical. And I'm curious where you fit that into your prep process. Is that something that you have learned to build over the years? So you've got kind of a filing system that, depending on what topic comes up, you've filed some away. Do you? How does that work? I'm curious how you build that in.
Yeah, I may not have mentioned that in there. I do that all along. Their ideas come to mind. I have conversations, and I think this is one of the values of preparing ahead of time, is that the things you experience over the weeks between beginning preparation to the actual preaching, you have conversations and experiences that I think the Lord divinely brings in, and that, and then I do check sources, quotes from other people that I've appreciated, historical notes that I've found. It just comes from a variety of. I don't have a system of noting applications. I just gather them. Uh, about the best way I can put it.
Yeah. No, it's great. Part of me was wanting to steal an idea if you had figured that out. I have tried over the years and I cannot. I mean, I collect illustrations, but then they get buried and I forget that I
Same here.
have them. And yeah, it's just,
Yeah,
I
same
wish I
here.
could just
Yeah, I don't
call
have a
them
file system for illustrations applications. I just gather them and try to keep them, and then sometimes forget that I've got them. And,
out.
but I do have files that have them, and so I'll go to that occasionally.
Okay. Okay. So Carl, let's move on. I appreciate you sharing that process. Let me just ask you a couple of questions, just looking back over your 40 plus years of pastoral ministry. I'd like you to just kind of answer the following questions. We'll just take one here. Um, as you look back over the years, what are one or two things that you would have done differently as you think about your ministry?
It's hard to narrow it down to one or two, but uh, one would be I wish I would have started journaling earlier, so I'd
Mm,
have some of the questions you asked earlier on, like the first message, preaching and teaching. I'd like to have been able to go back and look at that. And I would like to have done that. Secondly, I think I would like to have been less preoccupied with the duty.
mm,
Sometimes I just felt so responsible and overwhelmed. I did not give the attention to my family that I needed.
mm.
Especially, I think my first wife, she was so gracious and understanding, and I've tried to change that after her death and my remarriage. But I those are two things. I just felt so responsible that that seemed to occupy me perhaps more than it should.
Yeah,
So,
and I appreciate that. And obviously you've reminded me and encouraged me so many times over the years in that very area. So I definitely appreciate those comments. Well, we'll pick up on a couple of more of those in the next session, and so we'll close that out right now.